especially the way you described it with the yeast and
The yeast, yeah.
yeah. That's something that'll stick with me because it's very visual.
It's very visual.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is of course my challenge to talk to you. Everything that I'm talking about is very clear to me. It's my own experience. But by the time I put it into words, you are like the radio, it's like sending a message by radio. There's the transmitter and there's the receiver. How this is heard by individual receivers, it's not necessarily the way I intend it to be understood. So I'm mindful of that and I'll try. Okay, we'll have a question then.
Okay.
I started recording already, so
Sorry.
just
Okay.
record the little lead-off part, I
That's
guess.
fine. And I just want to say for the tape that's for oral history of the Holocaust class at Goucher College, the interviewer is Sarah Rauscher, and we're interviewing Dr. Werner V. Cohen. Would you tell me about the town that you grew up in?
Yes, I was born in a city called Essen, E-S-S-E-N. The city was about as large as Baltimore was when I first came here. In other words, just short of 700,000 people. And the city occupied a unique position in German industry because it was the center of the Ruhr district, where there were coal mines, and there was iron ore. This confluence of raw materials there was good for armament manufacturers. Krupp, in addition to everything else, was the largest armament manufacturer, and they employed hundreds of thousands of the people who lived in Essen. Maybe let's say 100,000. So the closest city in America at that time would have been Pittsburgh. A city like Pittsburgh.
Would you describe your home growing up? Did you live in a single family home?
My father had owned a 3-family home. My family occupied the first and second floors, and there were rented apartments on the second and third floor. How did I get that? Yeah, the basement was parterre. It's a French word. Parterre means at the level of the street. So parterre first, and then second and third. Okay.
Tell me about your family. Did you have siblings?
I have one younger sister who is 3.5 years younger, who also survived the war, and she lives in Baltimore.
What did your father do for work?
My father was in the textile business. He was a manufacturer of men's pants, and that was his livelihood.
What kind of school did you go to?
Well, at 6 years I entered a public school. And in Germany, in my town, there existed a Jewish public school. And for the first 4 years of my life, I went there, where I got introduced not only to regular elementary subjects, arithmetic and writing and this type of thing, but they also introduced me to Hebrew language exercises, learning how to write, this type of thing.
And did you speak Hebrew at home?
No, we speak German.
Spoke German?
German.
Did you have friends at school, friends in the neighborhood?
Yes, I had friends in school, and in the early years I had many friends outside, so when as time permitted, I asked my mother whether I could go outside, because the guys would hang out on the street corner there, and sometimes they were a couple of 3 years older than me, which was very exciting to be mixing with these ancient types,
What would you do for fun when you hung out?
Well, if we were, they always had a lot of tricks up their sleeves. I don't know what. Not that we did this habitually, but there would have. I think there might have been one or two occasions I remember where kids went down the street and pushed everybody's button, bells at the door, and the housewives were wondering what. Nobody came up after they opened this time. This was. I say it happened once or twice. That wasn't a normal thing. It was more. But you're hard put to say what was going on, talking about sports and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. What kind of sports did you play?
Well, I was in Germany. Soccer was the big game. I did play some soccer, but only when I went to what we call high school, and we had afternoon meetings for the express purpose of providing physical exercise. So I would play that, but in school, and particularly now I'm already what I call high school. At 10 you went to high school. This is different from here. It was a totally different layout. And maybe I should spend a second on that. We call it a gymnasium. And you had a choice of different gymnasium. Mine was a language-oriented one, particularly for antique languages. So people took Latin, Greek, and other languages, also of course everything else. But there were other high schools you could go to with engineering bias and this type of thing. So I went to a high school called Goethe, 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 named after the German premier poet, and that was his name. So that's, and there we had, and now I'm talking again about once I entered there, every week we had 2 or 3 classes during the day. It's part of the normal curriculum layout, where we just simply adjourned to the gym, changed, and then had exercise. And then we called that gymnastics, gym, which was mostly the equipment that you've seen maybe in the Olympics, parallel bars, horizontal bar, or what they call the horse and this type of thing. So that was my principal sport.
You said when you were in younger schools, it was primarily a Jewish school. Was there the gymnasium as well, or was it? No,
the gymnasium was just a general a German one, and the Jews were that went there were a very small minority, maybe one in a class. Or if there were 2 Jewish guys there, that was already a lot. None more often.
So it sounded like you had a lot of interactions with Jewish and non-Jewish people in the town.
All the time.
Was your neighborhood primarily Jewish?
No.
No?
That doesn't exist in Germany. At least I don't know whether it existed in Berlin, but nowhere else did you have that. The German Jews lived at random amongst the population.
In school, did you have any favorite subjects? Anything you
Well, sports number one.
Sports?
Well, I was a bit of a jock, you might say. To the extent that when I was offered to learn piano or violin, I wouldn't dream of it. That was not with the crowd that I was hanging out with. Favorites. I was always interested in history, and as far as school was concerned, I would have to say I was interested in everything.
Could you take me through a general day in your life when you were younger, your routine, getting up and going to school?
Well, I will tell you something. Now going back earlier, when I was not yet in school. My mother and others in her circles, we had help in the house, also for the children. And so when my kid sister was still in her pram, in her baby carriage, I dragged along, wherever we went to park. see the peacocks or whatever, swans and so forth. I just wanted to tell you about the atmosphere that existed in Germany by telling you that this lady, on one occasion, took me into a church. I would guess maybe it could have been a Catholic church. And as we went in there, she pointed out a figure on a cross. And do you know who that is? I said, no. So she said, well, that's Jesus. I said, oh, I was only 4 or 5. So she said, you know what? You killed him. I said, I killed him? I never killed anybody. Why are you saying that? I said, yes, well, maybe you personally didn't, but your people did. So it gives you an idea of what I had to put up with. Another time, I think this is, I've heard that, a little, one of the, again, a helper, what do we call them, nanny? My father overheard she was putting me to bed and she made some remark about a little Jew boy or something like that. He fired her. He didn't need it. But the population was imbued with a negative, stereotyped impression of who the Jews were. In American films you have white hats and black hats, and you always know who is the good one or the bad one. Black hats are the ones you have to watch out for. Well, in Germany, this painting black and white involves the Jews. But long before Hitler was there, the confrontation with Jews was always under the surface. You had to watch yourself constantly. If nothing else, if you did something that wasn't, somebody might say, well, that's a typical Jewish thing to say or to do. So for you guys, I'm going to say this, including all of you, living in America, you'd have no concept of what I'm talking about, and therefore I have to point it out. We have in this country a union that is based not on where you come from or particularly distinguishes between people on their characteristics, but the underlying contract is that of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And it doesn't matter what you look like, and the judge cannot take that into account. In Germany, there was always the us, and everybody who was not us was them. And therefore, since in Germany, the only people who were them, we didn't have many foreigners there. Until I came into England, and by the time I was 17, I never seen a black woman, and I only seen 1 or 2 black men, and that was soldiers from the French occupation after the First World War. So we didn't have what we called minorities. Minorities not in the sense of Negroes, but in the sense of people who are not the dominant part of the population. So they only had Jews, and the them was always us, and that sort of was deep ingrained in the psyche.
Did that create any separation between you and your schoolmates when you were?
Well, I tried my best always to fit in. You know, you become conscious of something, and then you have that, of course, in your mind. My friends in the street or else didn't have to constantly be aware of who they were. But I had to put into the calculation everything in order to make sure that all the points of importance had been covered by me in my awareness. So no, the kids in the street that I played with, mostly before when I was in elementary school, they were neighborhood kids, and we were okay.
And you mentioned the school system was different. Did you go to school?
Well, I wanted to say, at 10 years, you went to high school. Mm-hmm. My first foreign language was Latin. And then 2 years later, I had French, and the 4th year I had English. And all along, of course, you had German history, you had geography, the whole bit. I mean, the most unbelievable education that you could have probably imagine. I've never learned, after I left, was forced to leave after 16, I can't say that I ever had any essential education thereafter, other than that I acquired on my own. It was a fantastic education, but it was elitist. In other words, you had to pay for it. And once you got into the school, there was an approach to education which was one of producing top people at the expense of all those who couldn't cut it. How did that show itself? Anybody who couldn't cut it was left behind. If it was 5 they left behind, that's all right. One time they left 13 behind of 26. There was no parent revolt. There were no riots in the streets. The understanding was, if you go to that school, you can't hack it. Don't blame anybody. This kind of thing I can't visualize in this country. People go to a professor and say, I want to go to university, can't you up my grade or something like that? Would have been impossible. He would have said, no, you failed, that's it. So, in the normal course, you would stay 9 years. And by that time, you would have had finished with the second year for college. That was part of high school.
Did you go full, 8 hours a day at school?
No. We never went that long. We went, I think it started at 8, and we let out at 1, occasionally at 2, but that was a school day. But the workload and homework was excruciating. You worked till midnight. So because nobody took care of there was no concern about other people. The mathematics guy had gave you this. The English guy had required an essay. The Latin guy wanted a preview of Livius for the next day. And everything accumulated. When you were finished, you were through. If you couldn't hack it, you were left behind.
So for your midday meal, would you eat that?
Yeah, my mother would give me a sandwich or two.
Okay.
Yeah. There were breaks between the hours, each hour.
Did you have any favorite foods growing up? Any special foods?
No, I ate everything. My mother didn't cater to that kind of food. Whatever I serve, you eat.
Well, was there anything when she would make it you were particularly happy about?
Yes. And I tell you, this is something that today I don't understand. I loved a certain lemon dessert. It was, I think there was whipped, she took an egg or egg white and whipped it and put some sugar in it. And it was a delicious little, I forget, there's a name for that. You can put that on top of something.
Meringue?
Yeah, meringue. Meringue.
Yeah.
Okay. That and if I got good grades, she said, well then, we'll see that we get some meringue here for you. But I remember that, the first time, and I was only in grade school, the first time they graded, I got an A, and so did my friends. The second time I got a B. And when I come home, I didn't know what to say. So I had a B. She said, what did you get? I said, a B. He said, well, you had another boy there in my Jewish school. G-E-R-D, Gerd was his name. Gerd Rosenau. He said, what did he get? I said, he got an A. He said, oh. He said, oh yes. Oh well. I don't always have to be so nice to you if you can't get me the A, and we won't have much of meringue for a while. So after that, I didn't dare to bring anything home with A's because it had nothing to do with meringue. What he basically was doing was withdrawing her love. I'm giving you conditional love. You meet the conditions, otherwise, today people would be horrified.
Were you close with your younger sister?
No, she was a pest.
Well,
She is still a pest. She's 81 years old.
what was her name?
Loi, L-O-I-E. No, I know somebody he spells Laure, somebody I know, but in Germany Lore, which is a word, a law, folklore.
Did you have a different name growing up in Germany than you do now?
No, I would never change my name.
Was your family particularly religious?
No, this is a point of great regret to me. My father came from a family. His father was a kosher butcher in a small town in Friesland, which is a province on the sea coast, North Sea. And he had, he knew prayers and had the background there. My mother came from a totally what we call assimilated family, didn't know anything. And consequently, in our household, we never had anything, except for Rosh Hashanah, we would go to synagogue, and we fast on Yom Kippur. And so, but there was not a spirit of Jewish awareness. And it was only after I got to know my wife, who came out of the Holocaust, I met her here in Baltimore, and when our kids came, she became again very observant and gave us a Jewish household, a strictly Orthodox household. And that, on the basis of her influence and her knowledge, I have 3 daughters who are strictly Orthodox, and have two of my son-in-laws who were not particularly in the fold. Through the influence of my daughters, today are extremely observant on their own, not because anybody's holding a stick over their head. And their kids, I've got 12 grandchildren, they're all yeshiva educated, some of them are married, have children of their own, and so my family then in Essen lacked that a component, you might say I would have been entitled to.
You said your father was in textile work?
Yeah, manufacturing.
Manufacturing?
Well, he didn't do it himself. He was done on his we'll say so.
Did you have any day-to-day chores that you were responsible for in your household?
Not really. I voluntarily took care of a small yard. To this day, I'm interested, in flowers and this type of thing. So I did that. No, in those days, we had household help.
You mentioned the one woman you had when your sister was younger. Did you consistently have help through the years then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't unusual. The help was not too expensive in Germany. Everything is relative, and the society depended on. There was a gradation. In Mexico, you have that to this day. If you live in Mexico, you can hire people. There are people who, for very little money, will come and work for you.
Was it usually one person more than one?
Well, that, very, very little. There was a nanny and there was a housemaid. And I think there may have been a cook or something, I forget. It's a little vague in my mind. But after we grew up enough not to need special assistance then there was always a housemaid.
So when you said you were in school from about 8 in the morning till 1 or 2 in the afternoon, would you study for most of the night then? Because you said you had a very heavy...
Yeah, I mentioned sometimes I had to go back to school to play soccer or something like that. And also I belonged to an athletic club, a Jewish one called Maccabi. Hakoah, actually. Hakoah it was called. And so I would go out and do more gymnastics. Yeah. That was sort of my life,
You make sure you balanced your studies with you're interested in athletics then?
Yeah, well, not consciously balancing anything.
Yeah.
It's just doing what I.
You said you were a jock, you liked that.
Huh?
You said you were a bit of a jock, that you liked.
Yeah, but if you are in that frame of mind, you're not patrolling yourself. Some other person might be a musician and messing around with a violin from morning to night or something.
Yeah.
It is.
Now I know you said you had some help in the household, and that wasn't unusual for Germany at the time. What economic bracket would you put your family in? Were you a little better off?
Middle class, upper middle class, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Relationship with father and mother.
Were you close with your parents?
Yes, I thought of it them being close, and I said that I have had time to think about it. When I see my daughters and their interaction with their children, it was nothing like that. For one thing, there was always a nanny. So we ate together, we had meals. But my mother had other interests and pursued them. And in the evening, before we were put to bed, the nanny would take us to see our parents. Sometimes they were entertaining other people, playing bridge or whatever they had in the house. And we just go in and say good night, and the people all look around and say, "Oh, there, how are you? Nice to see you." And the nanny would sort of give me a look with her eyes that would say, "Oh, that's enough already. Come on, you go to bed now." So I trot out. That was when I was little. I didn't have the hands-on interest that but I didn't feel deprived because nobody else seemed to have it. You live in a society, and whatever goes on, that goes for you too.
Did your father have any, you said your mother did some outside activities. Was your father in any clubs or any other organizations?
Oh yes. But the big thing for my parents was playing cards. My mother loved playing bridge, was an excellent player, and so she was more than a little engaged all week, different places and so forth. Reciprocal. Much of it entertainment was done at home, but they belonged to one or two clubs also where they could go and play, and that was all done without the children, of course. So.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you would like to add about your life growing up?
I thought of it as a happy childhood. It was secure, but I was still very young, maybe 7, 8 years old. The depression which had visited Germany caused incredible hardship on the working population. These were coal miners, people who had been laid off temporarily. And the women with their children would come around asking for a sandwich. And sometimes one would hand the door to somebody else, and I couldn't take it if my mother were to say, "This, I can't give you anything, I'm out of bread," or something like that. It was a very hard time. So German economic situation was very bad, and I was able to witness that. I remember one of the women with a baby sitting on the steps in my house and nursing the baby and so forth. This poor woman had to drag a kid along to see what she could do to get something to eat.
Was your family affected by the economic depression at all?
Well, I do not know that much about it. My father ran a very tight ship, and I do know of people who had perhaps more ambitiously expanded and then found it difficult to maintain this. And there are at least one bankruptcy that I can think of that we would never have expected. Where you might have said, well, look at the operation that he's got and what you are running. My father was not into showing anything to anybody. and kept control. But if you get if you got a little too ambitious, you could perhaps pay the price under adverse circumstances. It's like investing.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned also your house. You had 2 other families rented the other floors.
Yes.
Were you friendly with them?
Well, we were friendly with them, but not in a social way. They lived their lives. I've met them in the hallway,
Mm-hmm.
and that's about all.
And you mentioned when you played outside, it was mostly in the street. There wasn't much like grassy area or.
Well, right where we lived there, maybe not so much grass. I told you that when I was little, my nanny would take us to parks,
Mm-hmm.
but not in the street. Would you describe this here as being park-like here or what?
A little, yeah. I mean, you have your own land. It's not
Yeah.
like when you're in inner city Baltimore and there's mostly concrete.
Yeah, well, we were a little bit more in the city,
Mm-hmm.
so more like Uta Street or something, something like that.
Anything else?
Did you have any pets?
Did we have pets? No.
Well, unless there's anything else you wanted to add about your life before the war, I think we have
That's
a lot
it?
covered.
Well, before the war, well, there's a lot that I could say. For instance, after I went to the high school, gymnasium, there came a time when, in their 6 years, with the conditions getting more and more Nazified, so the director of the gymnasium let me know to come in with my parents, and we were told that that I could no longer go there, so that after then I had to leave the gymnasium, and I was one of the very last of the Jewish, because this guy was not a Nazi, and he kept the few Jewish guys that he had in his school as long as he could. But then there's a lot that needs to be explained, that I then went to a Jewish high school, but not in my city. And this was the Yavne school in Cologne. And there they had a program that was set up for people who already thought of emigrating. And they had some English teachers there. The classwork was all in English, and it was to prepare for the Cambridge matriculation examination. So after I was kicked out of the high school, I attended there for maybe 3 months, 2 or 3 months. And by that time, we are up to what is known as the Kristallnacht, November 9, 1938. And let me just say that in the morning, in order to attend in Cologne, I had to get up maybe 4:30 or 5, catch a train, go from Essen to Cologne, and then in the afternoon come back. That day, the gate was closed. I didn't know why. The big gate was closed. And one of the English teachers, I still remember his name was Alan Dorusset, he made himself known at the street corner, a little up the street. They whistled on his fingers. And when I went up there, he asked me, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What? What am I doing here?" He said, "Well," I said, I come every day. He said, "Yeah, but don't you know what today is different?" And I said, "No, what is going on?" And he said, "Well, they have burned the synagogues, destroyed the synagogues, a lot of stuff going on. You just don't know it." And I said, "No, you better go." So I went back on the train, And then, as I approached my street, which was sort of curved, as I rounded the curve, looking ahead where my house was, there were lots of people standing there, rubbernecking. And I said, all of a sudden I became aware, Russ had said something about something going on, and something was going on in my house. So it became personal, and I got closer, they opened up, they split like the Red Sea, gawking at me. Then I became aware of it, what they were looking at. Everything in the house had gone down, there's crystal, wine glasses, just anything, pictures, furniture, all in the street. And I said, oh. So I went inside, my mother was there, my father had been taken into custody, and my little sister was there. And she said, well, Gestapo, secret state police, Geheime, had been here taking my father. You better go upstairs, and I had a room on the third floor, separate from our apartment. So we hide there. And but they found me, they came back, and then they took me. I was first taken to a local jail. I filled it up with Jewish men on that day, they all apprehended them, and stayed there for a week. And then we were transported on a train to southern Germany, and I found myself in Dachau, in a concentration camp. So that's all before the war started. And I just want to say that the circumstance of me being put into that camp, of course, it's not what I want or what my parents would have wanted for me. But if it had been that, like most of my contemporaries of the same age, it was only 16, they would have overlooked that age for incarceration. In my case, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. You say, well, what are you talking about? What does that mean? I'm telling you that what turned out to be an obvious misfortune, because the conditions in the concentration camp that I can talk about were such that you don't wish it on anybody. But I was 4 weeks later released to be able to go on a Kindertransport to England. The extraordinary steps were taken to take this 16-year-old and put him into a class of 13-year-olds. The transport that was organized by the Yavne school, by the principal, he had permission to send a class of about 13-year-old, a class. He attached me, in order to be able to get a release, to those 13-year-olds. And that's how I got out, and I survived. Had I not been a case for special consideration to be put into that class, I would have joined my parents, who were sent to the east and were killed. So this happened before the war.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think we'll save the rest of that story
Yeah,
for
okay.
the second part of the interview. Okay. I think.
Okay.